I don't think that I've actually shared a clip of Cornel West, like a full clip of Cornel West on my show yet, which is madness because he's literally like my favorite person in the world besides Tammy, of course. My favorite person like in the world on this planet. And I just think, I really do believe that he is the greatest, public intellectual of our time. I think it's Cornel West, Noam Chomsky, Richard Wolff, Chris Hedges. They're all up there. I'm going to miss others. I do every time. Dr. Harriet Fraud is up there as well for me. But I just believe that these are he's a massively important voice and someone that is literally, his legacy that he will leave behind is that of a Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, a W.E. Du Bois, or James Baldwin, and what he's done to advance human rights in this country. And he's done it in a way that is unique in recognizing the shared humanity of all peoples everywhere, and to never lose sight of that. And I think there are some folks that have, James Baldwin, I would say, is probably another that, never lost sight of that and really centered marginalized people, across the world. And so next up, let's hear from Cornel West. This is his speech at the People's Convention. He doesn't need much of an introduction. He's a Harvard professor. I think he may also teach at the New School sometimes, but I apologize. That could be incorrect. But he is a professor at Harvard, I believe, and I don't need to introduce Dr. Cornel West. So without further ado, we're going to hear from Dr. Cornel West. For this, I'm playing the entire clip. If you're watching this after the fact or you're not watching live right now, feel free to speed it up a little bit. You can play it at 1.5 times, up to 1.5 times, but you just get the real impact of it when you just play it at a regular speed. And this is worth listening to. So we're going to hear Cornel West full clip. It's about 10 minutes. So bear with me. If you got to go grab a drink or something, you feel free to pause, come back, whatever you got to do. But watch this clip. If you're watching this, watch this clip. Listen to Cornel West speak. When he speaks, we should listen.
Oh, well, let me first begin by saluting you, my dear brother Nick. Who would have thought 3 years ago when we met in Washington, D.C., that you would be able to spearhead, you and Ryan and the others, and allow us to be a part of this magnificent moment, generating the kind of momentum and movement in order to transform the American empire into a more democratic space. Alongside the marvelous militancy of a moral and spiritual and political nature on the streets in the last few months, these 4.5 hours that I've been blessed to listen to every minute has been such a magnificent inspiration, because that's very much what we need. And by inspiration, I don't mean just abstract projection. I mean enactment and embodiment of examples of people who have integrity, honesty, decency, courage. And that's what we heard in every voice going back to 4 o'clock. And I come from a tradition of people, Black people, the grand people, producing a great tradition in which the anthem is lift every voice, not the echoes of the neo-fascist wing of the ruling class, the Republican Party, the neoliberal ruling class, the neoliberal wing of the ruling class, the Democratic Party. No, that's the echo chamber. That's what we saw in those conventions, with their talking points, with their superficial spectacle. But no, I come from a people who believe in the funk. Allow your voice to be heard from the deepest levels and corners of the dark corner of your soul, that such that you will engage in a genuine quest for truth. And the condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak. Everybody's suffering, no matter what color, no matter what gender, sexual orientation, no matter what national identity, and then connected to a love of beauty. And beauty is always something we grasp for in the face of terror, as Rilke taught us. And then, of course, the quest for good and wrestling with evil. And then for some of us, it's even a quest for God in the face of so many demonic and devilish forces that are shot through not just our structures and institutions, but shot through our very souls and hearts. 57 years and 3 days ago, the greatest public intellectual in the history of the American empire died in Ghana. His name was W.E.B. Du Bois. And that next morning, young brother Martin Luther King told America about a dream that he had, which was not the American dream, but a dream rooted in the American dream, and has everything to do with the movement for People's Party. Because what we're talking about here is a people who muster the wherewithal, who have not just the courage, but the fortitude to fructify. And by fructify, I mean to generate the fruits of truth-telling, to generate the truth of justice seeking, to generate the truth of kindness and sweetness and gentleness in how we relate to each other, but with a steel spine when it comes to bearing witness in the face of oppression. That's why Du Bois raised the 4 questions. What does integrity do in the face of oppression? Oh, here's the people's movement and the People's Party. What does honesty do in the face of deception? Here is the People's Party at its best. What does decency do in the face of insult and assault? What does courage do in the face of brute force? We are living in a moment of massive imperial meltdown, spiritual breakdown, and we need prophetic fight back. And the People's Party is a prophetic fight back that, like Du Bois, believes in multiracial, multi-gender, multi-sexual orientational, multi-binary and non-binary sexual sensibilities and orientations, a solidarity with those fransphonon called the wretched of the earth that can tell the truth about America, both its best and its worth. Because let us never forget, each and every one of us come out of various families, communities, and traditions. So we have to be true for where we come from. And I come from a people who have been on intimate terms with catastrophe. So the ecological catastrophe impending, the nuclear catastrophe that we don't like to talk about with the gangsters in Russia and the gangsters in the United States and the gangsters in other ruling elites that have the possibility of pushing buttons and blowing us all up. The economic catastrophe with unbelievably grotesque levels of wealth inequality that we hear over and over again, and the refusal to come to terms with poverty, the refusal to come to terms with working people's empowerment through unions in any means by which they can live lives of decency and dignity. The intimate forms of resistance and resilience in the face of catastrophe. 400 years of hatred. Here come love warriors like John Coltrane, Love Supreme. Here come Martin Luther King. Here come Ella Baker. And Brother Biden tried to appropriate Ella Baker. Ella Baker was trying to create a third party when she met her end with Arthur Cornel and the great William Kunstler and others. Same tradition. In the face of trauma for 400 years, here comes healing. Not just Aretha Franklin, not just Erykah Badu, not just Kendrick Lamar, but a whole wave of voices in churches, in mosques, in synagogues, secular forms, trying to heal folk, to empower folk. Why? Because just like our moment, we all wonder. This is Marcus Garvey's question. Does America even have the capacity to treat the masses of Black people with decency and dignity? Not just make room for the Black bourgeoisie and the exceptional Negroes who view themselves as exceptional, who are highly educated. I'm talking about the masses of Black people. And we raise that question for the masses of poor people, the masses of indigenous people, the masses of Asians, the masses of Chicanos and Browns, the masses of all working and poor people here and abroad. The American empire at its best articulates the vision of a Sly Stone. Everyday people ought to have a dignity and decency. The vision of a James Cleveland. Ordinary people ought to have a dignity and decency. Emerson agrees. Whitman agrees. Gene O'Neill agrees with his indictment in The Iceman Cometh. Toni Morrison agrees. But does America have the capacity? We're all wrestling with despair. That's the skeleton in our closet. we're living in a fascist moment, escalating, crystallizing, consolidating, solidifying. And that's the worst of America. Here comes the People's Party. And let us listen to what Edward Said has to say about precious Palestinian brothers and sisters that never loses sight of the humanity of Jewish brothers and sisters, understands the 2,000 years of Jewish humanity being trashed and hated. And yet even our Jewish brothers and sisters in their right-wing forms have the capacity to dominate and occupy other people. Yes, they're human beings just like anybody else. That has a spiritual component to it and a moral element to it, but it's political in bringing all of us together. Can we listen to Dorothy Day? Can we listen to Cesar Chavez? Can we listen to Ward Churchill? Can we listen to all of our voices, Grace Boggs and others, the best of who we are as a species, as a nation, as an imperial experiment, as an imperial democracy? And yet, as my dear sister Marianne said, recognize that there's the best in America that has always understood that if our lives matter, if Black lives matter, we're going to have to make sure that democratic practices and orientations and means of being in the world are reproduced and expanded. If any lives matter, you're going to have major radical democracy. But can you have radical democracy in America without empire, without white supremacy, without male supremacy, without transphobia, without homophobia, without losing sight of the humanity of Muslims and Jews and Arabs? It's an unanswered question. We just don't know. And let's just be honest about it. There's nothing wrong with wrestling with despair the way Jacob wrestled with despair in the 32nd chapter of Genesis. But we can come up with a new name. God wrestlers with deep wounds, with deep hurts, with new energies. That's where we are now, right on the edge of the cliff with the neo-fascist gangster in the White House and the milquetoast neoliberals who still vote for his military budget over and over again. AFRICOM expands in Africa. The same ugly policies in Latin America. We've talked about the Middle East. We don't have time to talk about Asia, but that's very important too, with China and all of their forms of domination. What a time to be alive, pandemic and all. And yet, here comes the People's Party. Here comes that same radical democratic tradition that embraces us all. And I come in from the chocolate side of the empire and say, I'm bringing Curtis Mayfield with me. I'm going to bring Sam Cooke with me and Nina Simone with me. Why? Because they provide a structure of feeling and value that provides a ground for a prophetic fight back in the face of this empire collapsing and in the face of the possible regeneration and reawakening of it. Last but not least, at this particular moment, I've got brothers and sisters on both sides. When I listen to Noam Chomsky and Angela Davis, and even my dear brother Bob Ovakin and brother Carl Dix and others, they say, oh, we agree with the critique of the empire, but we cast a vote for Biden. I say, ooh, I'm not used to voting for milquetoast folk like that. But the anti-fascist folk, okay, I do understand. But I hear my dear brothers and sisters on the other side, Chris Hedges, Glenn Ford, Paul Street, Margaret Kimberly, Juma Baraka. I love those folk too. I learned so much from them. They all comrades. They say you can't vote for a neoliberal. You can't vote for the same Biden. You bring such critique to bear. You got to go for Green. You go for Brother Howie. You go for Sister Angela. That debate is a real one. And it ought to go on. And at the moment, I'm leaning with Angela. I'm leaning with Marianne. I'm leaning with Noam Chomsky. But it's not that it makes me that much better. I just believe as part of an anti-fascist coalition, Trump's fascism is one that calls into question the very possibility for any rights and liberties so that all of us could be gone. That's kind of basis that he has. What is it? 1 out of 4 of the folk who support him want to shut down the media. That's the kind of fascist sensibility. This is Sinclair Lewis. It can't happen here, taking place slowly in real time before our eyes. This is the kind of moment we live in. This is why this movement for People's Party is so fundamentally crucial. And we will resist the same self-righteousness that we get among the neoliberals. We are stepping into the unknown. So what? I come from a people that step out on nothing and still land on something that we ate, that we helped create based on a love of truth and a love of goodness and a love of beauty. Keep beauty in there. Beauty is very important for empowerment. So I want to bring this to a close. I want to thank you, Brother Nick. And I want to let you know that we've got to make sure that the lifting of the voices become waves all around the country, grounded in the local, but always having a global perspective of the American empire, keeping track of its worst, but also keeping track of the radical democratic tradition that has lodged itself at the center, or at the center of the soul of America, but never at the center of American politics. And it has always been multiracial, even though in a certain sense, it's been disproportionately Black. That's how deep white supremacy cuts. And you can't have fascism in America without white supremacy being its face. And that's why it's so crucial that all of us attempt to be decent people who have integrity, honesty, and courage, and be willing to enact kenosis, to empty ourselves, to donate ourselves, to sacrifice ourselves for something grander than us, that have everything to do with the best of those who came before and have everything to do with the children yet to come.
Dr. Cornel West, y'all. That is, he said in there that W.E.B. Du Bois was the greatest public intellectual of all time. He's humble. I get it. He is the greatest public intellectual of all time, in my not so humble opinion. But still respect his opinion there. And so that was a cool little, he's so great at historicizing. And so let me just, again, hold this in contrast to the DNC. That's the party that most of us are sitting in right now, right? Like, we're a part of this terrible, horrendous party, right? And like, compare just that 10 minutes to the entirety of the DNC. And look at that. It is just so refreshing to hear such a policy focused, humanity focused, humanist approach towards politics and policy. And it's invigorating stuff. I get so excited listening to Dr. Cornel West. And this time is no exception. He is a powerful speaker and just a clarion voice, really, on the left. And so I would like to, bring his voice into the conversation as often as possible. So what to say about that? This it's hard to follow up after, after Dr. Cornel West speaks. It's really hard to speak after that. So one cool thing that he pointed out was that the day after W.E.B. Du Bois died, that MLK gave the I Have a Dream speech. Did not know that. Just random cool little point of history. I was not aware that was the case. I didn't even, honestly, I'm still working on my reading of history and trying to do more and more and delve into that. I have a weird educational path that I followed, and I just didn't get that sort of learning about the American history. I went to high school in Jamaica, so I was learning more about Jamaican history than about American history for some of those formative years of my life. And so I haven't done enough to, I still need to do more. And I try to learn my history as best I can. I've got Howard Zinn's book here, The People's History of the United States, which is, I consider, just an amazing resource. It's almost textbook-like. It's hard. It's not, though, honestly. It's a good read. You can read it from start to finish. It's an amazing read. And so I've only read through the first 2 chapters of it so far. And so I'm trying to get a good read of history in a left-wing, from a left-wing perspective. And so, yeah, Howard Zinn is great for that. People's History of America, if anyone's not familiar, just the first chapter will blow your mind. So Yeah, he talked about the spectacle of the DNC and RNC. I thought that that was great. There's just talking about that spectacle of, it's all just spectacle and platitudes and spectacle and not substance. There's no substance to these things. It's fair mongering from the Republicans. Oh, Joe Biden's a crazy Marxist, Leninist, Stalinist, socialist who's going to come over. That we're going to do, you know, executions in Central Park. They're going to, you know, crazy radical left wing. You know, it's just BS and nobody buys it. Everybody sees what Joe Biden is. I literally feel at this point that the two parties are fighting to see not who can win, but who can lose. Like they're competing to lose right now. It's like who can do worse is really what they, and I think that this is an experiment in their opinion, you know, from them to see how far they can push the American people before we push back. You know, like how far can they push us? How much of our labor, the surplus of our labor, can they extract from us before we stand up and decide we want to take it back and take it for ourselves and leave it in the hands of the people who actually produce that surplus. So yeah, I mean, I love, he talks about beauty, kindness, love, you know, gentleness, integrity, courage. I mean, it's just these concepts that he gives so much power to these already powerful concepts. And I love when he talks about letting, you know, allow suffering to speak. That is, you know, revolution is you must allow suffering to speak. That's how you bring truth to bear. You have to allow suffering to speak. And that means, and that's what I think was happening in this convention, in the People's Convention. I think this was the first convention that we got to see in a long time where they let, you know, they allowed the suffering to speak. They allowed the people that are closest to the pain, you know, they allowed people actually close to the pain to speak. And they did, and they didn't filter them and they didn't force them to do a scripted, and they were allowed to speak. And it was beautiful. A few other things that he talked about. I love when he said he's from the chocolate side of the empire. I love him when he manages to just weave in a little bit of the humor, and just the way that he writes and speaks is beautiful. If you haven't read any Cornel West, I highly recommend you do so. I got his book, Democracy Matters. I've read Race Matters, and I've read the book Black Prophetic Fire was like the first book I've read start to finish, like in the last like 5 years. Sadly, I did about a year ago, and I hadn't read a full book start to finish in like 5+ years since before then. So that was really cool. I just thought that was hilarious. I really like that. You know, he speaks on the issues of radical democracy. I love the shout out to radical democracy. And I honestly, I mean, Cornel West is who I took the term from. I mean, he uses that constantly. He's my greatest inspiration. And so when building this channel, I thought, what do I want to do with this platform? And it was to try to move this cause forward, move forward the cause of building radical democracy. And so if that's something that you believe in too, then please support the channel, help us to grow, help us to exist. So if you can't afford it, please head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/radical democracy, and help support the show. It means a lot. It goes a long way. It literally helps the show to exist, because capitalists have all kinds of things in place to help them out, and they got all kinds of supports up and down throughout the system, loans that they can get and all that kind of stuff. I can't get a loan. I'm a Black person in America. I'm broke. I've been, you know, suffering under all of the racist and neoliberal policies, and I've struggled with debt. I got massive amounts of student loan debt. I can't, you know, I got terrible credit. I can't take out a loan, you know, like the system has worked its magic on me. And so this is my fight back. This is my way of contributing to this cause and actually trying to bring about a post-capitalist society. And so if you are interested in that and would like to support independent Black media or a democratic, you know, radical democracy and democracy in the workplace, then please head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/radical democracy. I am working on getting a non-capitalist platform that we can use. So more on that soon, but for now we're stuck on Patreon on this capitalist platform. Unfortunately, we're turning into, like, essentially Michael Brooks said, we're like Uber drivers. We're held to, you know, we're at the whim of these you know, app developers. And so in these tech companies. And so if they decide to change the rules or charge more, most of us wouldn't have we have no say in it. We have no democratic say in it, and we wouldn't have much of a choice otherwise. And so I want to support other democratic organizations and institutions and try to highlight them in different segments we do. I want to highlight like Cooperation Jackson. If you haven't heard of them or saw what they're doing, check that out. I mean, they're building real power across the city of Jackson, Mississippi through a worker cooperative movement and workplace democracy movement. So check them out, Cooperation Jackson. What else? Oh, I mean, I thought the other thing, the last point I'll probably make is, well, two, he gave a shout out to Marcus Garvey, who is the Jamaican national who came to America, was trying to fight for the repatriation, bringing Black people back to, Black people reclaiming Africa and going back. But, so whatever, Marcus Garvey, he's a national figure in Jamaica and somebody that we don't learn about in American history here, but he is a figure in U.S. history. And so I love when he gets that recognition from folks, especially like Cornel West. So he just talked about how he gave that quote about like, does America even have the capacity to treat Black people with dignity? And Cornel West extended it out to, do they have the capacity to treat Latino people, indigenous people, trans people, gay people? Do they have the capacity to, foreign-born people? Do they have the capacity to treat these people, Islamic people? Do they have the capacity to treat these people with dignity? And so that's a question we're still trying to answer, because it is still unanswered. Or if we're going to try to answer it now, the answer would be no if we tried to answer it right now. So we got to keep fighting for that, because at this point, the answer is still no, and we got to fight for that. My last point on the Cornel West clip is just the fact that he said, and this is what he's so good at doing, he's so good at it, is to say what he says, make these amazing points, defend his ideology and his principles, but then also say, like, listen, trying to tie it all together and maintain unity on the left. He says, listen, I love people on both sides of this argument. And he says he's leaning Biden, he's leaning in that direction, but even Cornel West does not have his mind made up on this issue. And he says, he loved folks on both sides of the Biden third party debate. He also said it's a debate that ought to go on. So this is what we're doing here, right? We're having that debate out, and the debate ought to go on. And here's Cornel, that's Cornel West saying that debate ought to go on. And who am I to, argue with Cornel West? I agree. I think that debate ought to go on. And so that's why we got to have that debate out, and we got to do it respectfully and respectful of one another, and understanding the positions that everyone's coming from, and that we're all trying to do our best. I think pretty much the vast majority of people, I truly believe, are trying to do their best with what they have. And they're just given a set of tools in the system and based on their environment, and they just make the best out of what they're given. And so I genuinely believe that everybody is trying to do their honest best. And for the most people, I mean, some people are malicious and just a greedy piece of shit and just want to exploit and take from other people and are happy to do that. Sure. I just don't think that that's the majority in any way. I think it's a very tiny minority of people. It's just, unfortunately, the system selects out those people and elevates them to the top so that they can exploit others. And that's considered successful. Your success in the capitalist system is a reflection of your ability to exploit others. So that's all that means to me. If you're successful in a capitalist system, great for you. You're really good at exploiting people. Golf clap. I don't give a fuck. Like, it doesn't interest me. It's not success in my book. It's why I have very little, room and bandwidth for the idea of celebrity. I just don't give a fuck about celebrity in a capitalist system. You're just, propping people up in the system does nothing but prop up the system. So yeah, I thought that he also said, like, the debate ought to go on, and it doesn't make him better. He says, it doesn't make me better because I'm choosing to vote for Biden. And people need to recognize that as well. There's a lot of vote shaming going on both sides, but let's be real, it really comes more so from the liberals than anyone. Vote shaming, telling leftists, staunch leftists, that they're somehow, it's their fault, Trump's their fault. Oh, you might as well cast a vote for Trump. And I've been told that on social media and elsewhere. It's really gross. It's not a way to convince anyone, as What Up America said earlier. It's just not a good way to try to convince people. Don't vote shame. Do better than that, folks. Thanks for watching Radical Democracy Podcast. I'm your host, Kahmali Rose. Please like and share this video, subscribe to the channel, and
If it doesn't bother you, hit that bell below to receive notifications whenever we go live or launch a new video. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you can afford it, do me a huge favor and head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/radicaldemocracy and throw me a few bucks. Whatever you can afford, it goes a long way and I will greatly appreciate it. It helps the channel to continue to exist and to grow. And I really appreciate the support. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon. All right. Peace. All right, that was a good one. That one's it.